Hey everyone, Bateman with Pixera here. We're going to talk through some 2.5D workflows today, so let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so I've already pulled up the latest version of Pixera here. And in my Screens tab, I want to set up my physical space. So I'm going to navigate to these row panels. I could use the search bar as well here. I'm going to pull in some BP2s to use. Just click and drag one panel in. I'm going to rename it. And give myself a 12 by 6 array. Put that in the center of my workspace here. And while holding shift, if I click and drag up in this panel angle box, I can actually curve my screen a little bit. One other thing I want to do here is I want to go to my cameras section and pull in a studio camera object. This will become important later. So now that I've set up my physical space, I'm going to move to the mapping tab. From here, I want to go to my live tab and actually assign this screen object to my output. In order to do that, I'll just twirl down my local machine here, find the output that I want to assign, and making sure that I'm in my screens mode, not my projector mode. F4 is that hotkey. Just click and drag this output onto this screen. Let's go ahead and activate that output, see what that looks like. And I can turn on my test pattern to see that I do have content coming out on my output. But it looks like I'm actually missing a couple of, one column of panels here. So let's fix that. If I click on my screen object and dive in, I actually get a feed mode where I can change the size of this feed on my output. This is my source, this is my destination. So let's change this destination feed a little bit. Let's change it by 10%. So I'll multiply that value by 0.9, which is the equivalent of shrinking it by 10%. And now we can see that I've got that final column over here on my output. All right, let's turn off the test pattern, go back to compositing, and continue on to compositing, I should say. And from here, I'm just going to add a couple layers. I'm going to rename these by pressing F2. I call this one foreground. This one mid, ground. And this one background. One of the other things I'm going to do while I'm setting up my layers is click on my layer and go to the inspector and setup. I'm just going to change these colors to make it a little easier for me to see which layer is doing what. Great. I'm also in this setup tab going to change my screen presence to be all screens. That's going to become important as we work with this camera later on. Let's go to our screen groups next and click on our screen group here. We could rename this if we wanted, but we've only got the one screen, so we'll leave it for now. And I could change this perspective mode. This perspective mode is really what's going to allow us to gain that parallax effect that we want when we're doing these 2.5D workflows. So let's change this perspective mode to 3D. And then look at this parameter here, perspectives follow screen positions. We want to uncheck that because we want our perspectives to follow the camera position, not the screen's positions. Let's go back to resources, twirl down our media here. We need some plates to actually work with to get this going. I'll go ahead and add a folder, call this my 2.5D content. Click on the plus button, and I'll bring in some of these plates here. I've already navigated to where I need to go to. Bring in that content. You can see it generating previews here. Now I'm just going to click and drag this content onto my foreground, my midground. And we got a couple options for skies here, but for now, let's take this one. No content is showing up because I'm still stopped on my timeline, which means my content is unloaded. So if I hit play, my content populates. Now, this next step here, this is a little subjective. This is where you and the creative team are going to work together to figure out what you want your shot to look like. But for now, I can size these things up. I'll size up my background first. And I'm going to move that way back in Z space. Size these up a little more. Maybe I'll move this up a little bit. Save those keyframes using the S key. Now let's do the midground next. Drill down my size here, lock those parameters. That back in Z space as well, not too far. Move that down a little bit, make it a little bigger. That's starting to look good over on our output over here. Save those keyframes using S. Do the foreground. And again, there's not a lot of science to this. This is a creative decision. This is where you're going to work with collaboratively with your team to make sure that this looks exactly how you want it to look. Alrighty, I'll save those keyframes as well. Now, if I dive into this screen here, just like we did in the mapping tab, we get a different view of our workspace. And from here, I can actually look and see what my plates are actually stacked up as. And in here, I could actually select this background, and I can use my shift key to make sure everything's locking and snapping, and maybe I'll move this back a little more. It looks like on my output, the top of this building is getting cut off. So maybe I'm going to move this down a little bit. And I'll move this one down to match. Something like that. Alrighty, I'll save all those keyframes again by pressing S. Now if I dive out, there's one last step that we need to take here before we really are set up. And that involves that camera object we brought in earlier. So if I click on my camera object, I've got this screens associated with camera over on my inspector here. And if I click on this edit screens, we can associate that screen object with this camera, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And now if I scroll down to this background section, we can see I've got a bunch of options, but the one we really want to check is this control perspective position of associated screens. Remember, we changed this parameter in our screen group so that the screen position didn't control it and our camera is controlling it. That's where this comes into play. And now if I move this around, we can see in our output that we get that parallaxing effect. Now again, this isn't perfect by any means, and you could spend a lot of time setting up exactly what you want this shot to look like with the parallaxing effects that you want. We also have a whole bunch of other goodies in this camera object here. For example, I could activate this background and project it on associated screens, and we can see now I've actually got another frustum on my output that is the camera's position, which can lead to a lot of really interesting effects. I've got live input. I can add a foreground. I've got my set extension parameters, as well as a compositing section, camera tracking, delay section. I can change these lens parameters here from tracking data coming in, or I can change these parameters to be whatever I would want them to be. We can then take this, we could actually take all this information in our control tab using a FreeD module. We'll make sure to link the help article to camera tracking in the link for this video. Alrighty, everyone. Well, thank you so much. That was our 2.5D workflow video for Pixera. Please make sure to shoot us any questions you may have, and we'll see you soon.